Hi, everyone, and welcome to Blush and Bloom, the podcast where we talk about women's health, self care, and the people making meaningful change in the world. I'm your host, Gigi, and today's guest is someone I've admired for a long time. If you've ever tracked your cycle on an app, you've definitely felt the ripple effect of her work. Joining me is Ada, entrepreneur, author, and the woman behind the coin term FemTech. She is the co-founder and former CEO of Clue, one of the most trusted health apps for women with over 10 million users worldwide. She's also the founder of FemTech Assembly, a think tank focused on driving investment in women's health as a path toward global well-being. In this episode, we talk about what led her to this space, how her childhood shaped her lens on technology, and what she's been thinking about lately, from supporting femtech founders to how we build tools that truly serve women. Hi, Ida. Thank you so much for being here. I am looking forward to having this conversation with you. So, my first question for you is, you're known as the founder of Clue and the co-founder of Clue and the person who coined Femtech. But who is Ida Tin when she's not on a stage or in an interview? And how do you introduce yourself?
That's a really nice question. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. Well, I definitely try to, I guess, in some ways, be as much the same no matter where I am. But of course, sometimes you're in your private self. And I'm a mother of 2 kids, and sometimes it's chaotic. I left their dad 3 years ago. It has been tumultuous, and I don't have an everyday life that is sort of super glamorous. I think it's probably very normal in some ways, except that maybe I travel more than most people. Well, though there are many, many people who travel a lot, but I feel I travel quite a bit.
Mhm.
But I love connection to the people that I'm intimate with in my life. I love looking at art and being in nature, and I love creating stuff. I like writing. Yeah.
That's so cool. I also like writing. So another question for you is going to be about your life so far. So you've lived a very non-linear life, from you went from art school to doing motorbike tours to working in menstrual health, building Clue. So looking back, do you see a thread that ties it all together?
I think I've always been very, in a way, unwilling to do something that didn't feel deeply meaningful. And I have always somehow had some idea of something I wanted to do, and then somehow managed to do it by going. I never managed to go sort of through the front door of anything. I always found sort of weird side ways to do things. I think the red thread is the sense of meaning and purpose that I find inside of myself. Yeah, it looks like it's like left and right, but somehow I think the thread is creating my own job, doing something that felt adventurous and maybe a bit difficult also, and hopefully helpful to other people. Yeah.
That's so cool. And so, are there any particular values that have stuck with you at no matter the stage you've been in your life and in your career that just stick with you through it all?
I think I have a big sense of responsibility, doing things in a way that feels ethical and sort of in integrity, I would say is important to me. Maybe there's also this building Clue. I think I very fast understood that I could never do this alone. So finding people who are better and smarter and more skilled than me in a million fields where I wasn't was really important. So this sense of, in a way, maybe some sort of humbleness that you need other people to also want to share your vision and your dream, and making it a place where other people can also thrive. I think that has felt very natural, I would say. I don't even know if it's a value that just felt like that's how you would do it. Actually, one funny thing was that when I had been building Clue for a while, people would say it's a really unusual organization But the thing is, I had never worked anywhere that I didn't create myself. So I had never worked in a normal kind of workplace. So to me, I just did things that seemed totally normal and natural. And then people would reflect that, like it's quite unusual. But I didn't know. So one of the things were, to build a workplace where people could thrive. And I have understood later that that's not necessarily how most organizations work. I have interviewed so many people that were looking to get hired at Clue that seemed very bruised coming out of their careers. Like sort of wonder like wow, what's going on out there? So yeah, kind of maybe a little bit out of ignorance or not knowing. I think that thing about trying to make a place where people could thrive was a really important value for me building Clue.
I'm actually like very curious about this right now because since you weren't in a particularly like say structured environment, if I understand you correctly, were there any like specific things that you had to look out for or you wanted to implement to make your company like a safe space for women to feel or people in general to work? Like, did you learn any concept from anywhere or you had to like build all those things from scratch?
So I think when you build a startup, you build something and then a few months later, it's already a little bit outdated and you build it again to fit. So in some ways, you learn and unlearn all the time building a startup. But I had gone to a very creative business school called the Chaos Pilots in Denmark, which was sort of a school for social entrepreneurship. And I think a lot of the mindset I got from that school was probably quite unusual to how most organizations. I don't know. I mean, I guess we just sort of try to listen to people working there as well, like what do they need? But we would do things like having like, Body Tuesday where people could do sports during the day. And we ended up having a 4-day work week. We had, people could bring their babies to work or the dogs. We had a place with no shoes. We had we had these offsites twice a year where we would always do something physical, like walking or dancing together, lots of hugs. I mean, there were many things that I think made Clue feel a little bit unusual.
Yeah.
That to me was just like, that's how, that's kind of what I need. I had small children, it's a lot of emotional roller coasters building a startup. So you want to have a place where you can talk quite openly to your team, stuff like this.
Also still very curious. Like this is very interesting for me because like so when so you were collecting feedback from your employees to be able to like build the culture that Clue has. So I mean, I'm guessing like several people had several opinions on what their ideal workplace was. So how did you like pick what's going to be implemented in terms of company culture and what would
I
line up?
mean,
Yeah.
I think one of the I mean, when you start a company, you do get to say what kind of company you want to build in some ways. I think many people maybe build a company that they kind of think is expected from them. You can do things quite differently. Like, for instance, I think in many startups, it's like, the Friday beer. But we had people who had kidney problems. So for them, it was like they couldn't drink alcohol. And we had like pregnant people and people breastfeeding. So it became quite natural that we would have a culture that wasn't centered around alcohol, for instance. It's not like there would be alcohol, but it was never like every Friday we would sit and get drunk together. It was like every Friday we would get together and we would, have a cake and soft drinks or something else. It's like, so it's just one very concrete example where it was feedback from the employees. It was also my own needs. And then it was this sort of very inclusive thing where, if you want a beer, fine, you can absolutely have a beer. But if you don't want to have a beer, that's also totally fine. We had, vegan options when there was food and just trying to be mindful of, what do people need. We also had a psychologist who you could book sessions with free of charge. There was no, I mean, as a company, it's not like we would get reports like what are people concerned about or what's happening, like nothing of that. It was completely confidential. But it created this environment where if there were something people were struggling with, they could go and get professional help, or if they had conflicts, they could ventilate it. So I think in the end, it was, how do we build for health? not just for our users, but also for ourselves as we're building this product. And this orientation towards health, I think, is actually like extremely important, because as a founder, when you build a company, you make all these decisions all the time. And how do you navigate? And I think our culture teaches us that we should navigate by, after making money, and the more the better. But I think this orientation around how do you build health for your employees, for yourself, for your users, and essentially for the planet, I think is a very healthy orientation. So that's maybe also one thing we navigated after trying to decide what company culture. But I think a culture it's also something that just kind of organically evolves rather than it being a really conscious decision making process.
That's so cool. So thank you so much for answering that. And I'm going to ask another question that's basically still around clues. So how about we go back to when you decided to make the decision to record your basal temperature. So what was going on in your life then, if you don't mind sharing? And was it curiosity, health concern?
Yeah, I had tried to be on the pill in my sort of early 20s, and I had side effects. I didn't like it. And I was in steady relationship like all the time since I was 16. So it was many years of trying to figure out contraception. At some point I came across this little handheld computer device that would, take your temperature, and it would help you understand which days you could become pregnant and which days not. And I used that because condoms get really annoying. So the less days you have to use them, kind of the better if you're in a steady relationship. And then as I was using that, I was like, oh, this is, for instance, it would only keep a 3 months memory. It only had a 3 months memory. So your data would disappear. And I was like, that's not great. So I would manually transfer this data to an Excel sheet. And it was just this experience of this could be so much better. So it really was this question around birth control. That was my trigger. And then also the smartphone came out around that time. I didn't have one, and I definitely didn't have money to buy one either. But I still had this sense of like, wow, this will be this really intimate place where you can interact with this data around your body.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, what if I could combine in a way this little device I had used with something that would live on a phone? That was sort of my first thought. And then later I was like, actually, temperature might not be the best. What if we could rather measure hormones? And what if we could do it in saliva, which would be much easier than trying to pee on something? It's like this evolution of thinking. Mm-hmm. And then all the way up to Clue eventually getting FDA clearance for being a contraceptive that was actually based only on data, which was an even easier user experience. You don't have to do anything other than tracking your period data into a phone.
I do have more questions around this. Like, how long did it take for the FDA to recognize it as a tool for contraception? And what was the process like for an app? Because my knowledge I have about FDA submissions is mostly around like clinical trials. Like, what was the process like, basically?
It was a long and very tedious process. So we had basically found a company who had run clinical trials that we could take over. That was a very lucky match. The woman who had done this out of a university or in collaboration with a university in America, she didn't want to build a commercial product on top. And it was just a really great match. So that accelerated our process with probably a couple of years that a clinical trial would have taken otherwise. And then you have to get clearance, you have to prove that the way you build your product is safe. So that happens what's called a quality management system, where you basically have very strict rules for how you, in our case, develop software. And so a big part of this whole process was documenting a lot of our code and our processes and so on. And it was a very long and very steep learning curve, actually. And we hired people who had some knowledge about how to do this. But I would say the team was absolutely incredible. They went through 2 years of really boring work, that they had never signed up. I think we were very lucky to have a team that cared so deeply about what we were building that they were willing to do this work. And I'm also very proud of the team because usually this is work for a much larger team. It usually takes much longer and costs much more money, and with teams that are much more trained for this. So the fact that we managed to do this, it was actually, I think, really impressive. But just to maybe finish that part. So we did get clearance and we did launch the product. And then we saw that basically one of the onboarding screens filtered out too many people. And we needed to change that. But to change that, we would have to go through a big chunk of this whole regulatory process again. And we didn't have the funds to do that. So then the product actually just got like put into a drawer on waiting, and it's still there, which kind of breaks my heart a little bit. But yeah, that's how it is.
Fingers crossed that something happens, I guess.
Yeah, I would love that. I always has this vision of like, you have so many people on the planet now who do have access to smartphones and data, and many of them maybe don't have access to birth control, and this could be part of a solution.
Yes. I do have another question around this. So when you were in the process of testing and the clinical trial process, how were you able to get like a diverse data set for this, or just what you were able to find?
Yeah, that's a really important question. So part of the approval process was to document that anybody who might need this product in the US would understand how to use it. And so we had to test on a very diverse user base to make sure that, it wasn't just, I don't know, a bunch of people in Berlin looking like us who would find this useful and understandable, but it was from all walks of life and all ethnicities. Am I saying that word right? Ethnic.
Yes, ethnicities.
Thank you. One of the great things about Clue's data set is that it's really diverse because we have had users from 190 countries, so really all over the world since day one. Yeah, I mean, I assume your question is coming from the sense that most of textbooks in women's health are coming from data that was collected on white college students in America.
Yeah.
This is obviously not helpful at all. It's super, in a way, on all levels, just outdated. Like with that, you cannot operate on data set that looks like that anymore. And it's still a really big problem.
And I just thought again, so like I'm also curious, like why the FDA? How about the EMA?
It's because, do you mean the European regulators?
Yeah.
CE mark? Well, it's because when we did this, there was a change of the regulatory framework in Europe, and the regulators were very overburdened, and the timelines were really not well known. So we didn't actually know when we would, in a way, get us like a time slot to be regulated. And being a startup where, you're always kind of pressed on funds, we decided to go with the FDA first. But since then, Clue has been regulated not as not as a contraceptive, but sort of as a period tracking app more generally in the European Union as well.
Okay. That makes sense. And moving away from this a little bit, so from your experiences building Clue and interacting with so many women in this space, so and your also your personal experience, what's one thing you wish more women knew about their cycles or reproductive health in general?
So I think one of the fascinating things when you start tracking your cycle is that you understand that your body is telling you a lot of things all the time. It's telling you something not only when you have your period, but also at the other times throughout your cycle. And actually, there are people who say menstruation should be a fifth vital sign. It's a really strong indicator of health or of something maybe not going right. Or, of course, when you go through menopause, if you have something changing, which is totally natural and okay. But I think it can become almost like a sense of compass or navigation in your life when you understand what your body is telling me or telling you, rather. Am I feeling sad today? Well, maybe it has something to do with your cycle. Or am I feeling more, sexually active? Do you feel It's your skin doing different things. It's
Mhm.
your, you can have various pains, your breasts are doing, like, there are many things that goes on. When you start tracking, you start being able to understand your body better. And then you can also raise the flag if something is starting to look out of the norm, your norm.
That makes sense. And so the thing, like many women like tend to pay attention to their health only when something is wrong. So do you recommend any habits or mindsets that you would recommend for someone who wants to be more proactive even when things seem fine?
Yeah, I mean, I think we live in a society where we expect everybody to be kind of the same every day, because that's
Mm,
just how men go through life. But we really live in a cyclical body,
mm,
and we don't have the same energy level at every day of our cycle. We don't have the same social needs. We don't have the same um, sex drive, etc. I think knowing your body and kind of working with it instead of a little bit against it, I think
mhm.
it's really big kind of eye opener for many people. And our bodies are pretty incredible. I mean, I think some of the things that we traditionally have maybe thought was really annoying, like if we have mood changes before a period or stuff like this. But my experience or impression is that there's usually some wisdom in all of these different phases. Maybe we get a little more sort of short tempered, whatever the term is. Uh, Usually there's some truth or information that is coming out when we are like that. Yeah. And also how to take care of ourselves, like,
Yeah,
making sure that we get the right kind of support or nourishment or rest at this right times.
that makes sense. That makes sense. Okay. So, were there any cultural messages around menstruation or women's health that you grew up with, and how did they shape your approach to building Clue and all the work that you've done?
I grew up in Denmark, where I think there's a very open culture. We have, I think, pretty good sexual education at schools. Um, But even then, I think periods were still somewhat a taboo when I was young. My mom it was not a taboo, but it was also not something that she kind of, I don't know, it wasn't like celebrated, I would say. It's not like there was like an amazing party of like, wow, now you are a fertile woman or something like this. It was more like, oh yeah, you also have to deal with this now. And that was kind of it. But my kind of starting point building Clue was not like let's break taboos. It was just like this is totally natural. Like what are you talking about? Like I didn't even want to engage in the idea that it could be a taboo. It was just it's just another part of health, you know?
Yeah,
And I know, of course, that that is not the case in many parts of the world, and the barriers that women face are very real, and it has really adverse effects and outcomes that it is so stigmatized. A I mean, it's crazy. Every single human on this planet has started inside a womb. But without periods, there were no people on the planet. It's just yeah, it's just such an odd thing that it ever could become a taboo in a way. Yeah. The ability to create humans is miraculous and fantastic. How can that become something embarrassing? It's like I don't understand it, but I know of course it's real. Yeah.
doesn't make any sense.
It makes no sense.
But at least we're making progress.
Yes, yes, we are. I mean, great that you are making this podcast. I mean, gosh, I mean, in Europe and in America, there's still so many stories of, girls who get their first period and they don't know what it is and they're super afraid. And, my mom tells the story of how she confused the words menstruation and demonstration, asking her mom, and she was like, it's a demonstration. And she was looking it up. And you can just imagine the confusion, right? And this little girl trying to make sense of why there's blood coming out. And it's so absurd. I mean, it doesn't have to be this hard. It really doesn't. We need to not make it so hard for girls.
Yeah. I agree. And hopefully I think like it's changing gradually. I'm also grateful, like in my personal experience, that the approach to menstruation was a bit more on the positive side, although we still tend to like hide it from boys and men and stuff. But then it's like I remember like I got my first period and my mom was so excited and she prayed for me and everything. Like that was, yeah, it was such a nice intro into womanhood, I guess.
Yeah.
So when I see like there's one of our partners, they do a lot of work around what's it called? They do a lot of outreach work for girls who can't even afford pads. I'm
Yeah.
like 5 and we're still having these problems.
No, it's I mean it's not fair. It shouldn't be this hard to have this amazing biology that everybody benefits from. It's but you know, I hope that with more education, women can have the courage to start changing culture around this, because I think, you know, we need the men to be allies and we need them to be supported, but I think we need women to be very brave. And, you know, when they have period pains, it has to be period pains and not a headache, you know? It's but and you know, I different women have different possibility to push sort of these cultural boundaries to
Yeah.
different degrees. And some people they can push hard and some people they cannot. It's actually dangerous for them to do it. And I really respect that people have different, you know, degrees of how courageous they can be. But the ones who have the freedom, it's great if they can speak up. And then also just, I mean, create great solutions, right? There's been very little innovation in, for instance, hygiene products. Now it's coming slowly, but we need to also build the things we want to have. We can see change.
It's yeah, I'm really excited like seeing all the changes in the space and also connecting with more women like yourself who are building and advocating for more women to build the solutions and adopt them and spread awareness. Like I used to think that painful periods were normal and then learning now that it's not normal. So
Yeah,
it's
and fund them, I should add. Yeah, this is another really important thing is the educational aspect,
mm,
right? Because, I mean, now you mentioned painful periods. Sometimes the mother will have had really painful periods, and then her daughter has them, and she's like, yeah, that's normal. When in fact, they're both suffering maybe from endometriosis or something else. So having really good information is important. And also fighting some of the misinformation that you will find online. There's a lot of myths and kind of weirdness being shared, not because people are evil, but you know, maybe also users, patients share something and it's not accurate, good scientific valid information actually. So we need good.
it's very interesting like the amount of information a person can have access to and then also like reminding people that it's not always one size fits all for when it
uh,
comes to healthcare.
Really not. That's so true. We have quite individual bodies in that way.
Yeah.
And there is also sadly just a lot of actual information gaps where, you know,
Mhm.
nobody knows. The science hasn't been done. We don't know why is this the case, or what is the risk for this, or what, you know, what could help with that, or is that linked to this other thing over there. We just still need a lot of research in women's health, many unanswered questions.
Yeah. Like also, I've recently seen that there's a lot of work around studying endometriosis and I'm super excited to see it. Hopefully I can also participate because like this is I think we're getting to the point where there won't be like that much of a need for invasive diagnosis and I'm like this is going to be so cool.
Yes, we desperately need that, and maybe some sort of treatment as well. That would be
Yeah.
nice.
Fingers crossed. So much to be optimistic about.
Yes,
Yes,
so much work to be done.
indeed, so much work to be done. So, question. So, are there any stories or moments that have stayed with you from the people who shared how your work impacted them?
I mean, I think it's always very moving when we hear user stories say, you know, I found out that I had this or that going on and it saved maybe my life because I understood early that I had cancer or pregnancy outside the womb or something else. Or people who say, you know, it has made me feel much less anxious about my body, my health, or I managed to get pregnant, which I really wanted to, or, you know, so like people having better lives. I mean, that's the whole point, isn't it? Of this whole thing. I think it has also moved me to see how building Clue and sort of giving name to some of this has helped other people start companies and build products and raise money. Like it had, that it has felt like it enabled other people to fulfill their visions and dreams.
Yes.
That's makes me, I feel kind of humble in a way, or like wow, imagine that. Like that's wow. It doesn't feel like something I did. It just feels like this incredible outcome that has happened because of some of the work we've done.
Definitely, like even Asela is partly inspired by your work and the work of all the other people before me, because I see all the amazing work you guys have done. I said the gender everyone has done over time, and it just inspires me to want to try. And there's lots of work to do in this space, so it's really, really cool.
Yeah, it's really wonderful the way that it kind of becomes an accumulated effect.
Yes.
That one company becomes part of building an industry that then makes maybe investors more likely to invest, or users more used to looking for products in this sector, stuff like this. I think this sense of we are like collectively and globally changing how women can take care of their health and find care, be educated. I love this feeling of us being like a global movement, I guess, or global community. It's also one of the reasons why I really think, it's so cool that you're doing this podcast, the sense of being part of this big change that we're all doing together.
Yes. So much to be excited about.
Frustrated about. Oh my gosh. There is also lots of things where you're like, what is this still a thing? It's unbelievable. Yeah.
Like that's like a whole conversation for a different day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So I wanted to ask you, so I know you're like you stepped down from your day-to-day activities at Clue, and now you're now on the board, I think, and you also do more work with FemTech Assembly. So since what's your life looking like these days, stepping back a bit from Clue? Like, what are you up to?
Well, first, when I stepped down, I was like, I'm just going to say no to everything for some time, which ended up being a couple of years, actually. And then when I came back and started looking in my inbox, I was really surprised that there was still anybody kind of remembering anything about me. But kind of to my surprise, a lot of people then was really curious about not Clue, but more FemTech and the sector and how that whole thing started and where we're going. And I guess I had spent some time during this time also writing on a book, and
Ooh.
more and more in a way caring about the sector and these sort of systemic issues also around what is driving it and what is not driving it, or what are the hindrances. And so I started getting invitations to speak at different events around the world and stuff like this. And I just like, okay, let's, it was this sense of the world was asking me to take a new role.
Yeah.
Be of service in a different way.
Mhm.
And I thought, yeah, I could see that the sector was benefiting from having somebody being able to speak in a way more freely, because I'm not only part of one company, but I can care more about the sector. And so I thought, okay, I'll do that. And then that just kind of continued. And I'm actually starting, fingers crossed, if all goes to plan, according to plan, I will start a position in September that I probably shouldn't talk too much about in detail yet, but it's basically trying to help drive innovation in women's health. I think that's, yeah. So, and I still want my book to come out, and yeah, keep doing the work I'm doing in the context of FemTech Assembly.
Could you like share more about your work at FemTech Assembly? Like, what's it about, and
Yeah.
aim to achieve with it?
As I told, I was traveling around to talk at all these different events, and I was, went to Japan and to Australia and to Israel and to America and Europe, like all over. And I got the opportunity to speak to people who are building femtech all around the world. and also meet excuse me, people from, say, global banks and the investors, the political systems, are really kind of all corners of the kind of not even just femtech ecosystem, but a larger system. And I thought that's the kind of work you would do if you were in a think tank. You would try to understand this bigger picture and form opinions and try to talk to people and see the world a little bit like you see the world. So I thought, okay, I'll create a kind of a context around myself, or like a container maybe rather. So started this as an NGO. And my hope is still very young, but my hope is that it can be a place where, in a way, I can help people who want to do something in femtech channel some of their good energy, because I meet so many people who say, I'd love to do something in femtech, but what can I do, or how can I be helpful? People who have careers and are really skilled and smart people start thinking, if I could create some sort of, I don't know, I don't have the right word for it, well, a think tank where other people can contribute in a way just by doing what they're doing anyway, but when sort of giving us more of a collective voice, more something like a social movement.
Okay.
Or even more like even just a hashtag almost, something that can, but then I come up with concrete ideas. Like I wrote this guide for men who wants to invest into women building femtech, because I realize there's a lot of thing that often goes a little bit wrong in that meeting when female founders pitch to male investors. So I wrote this guide, which is free for everybody to find on my LinkedIn page. I'm working on ethical guidelines for people building femtech, because I realized we don't have something that can be some sort of informal standard for what do we call good ethics. So I'm working with that together with one of the former CEOs also of Clue, and a bunch of other people. And I'm part of this organization called FemTech Across Borders, which is an organization bringing together all the people building ecosystems around femtech in different regions, so from all over the world, really trying to support these fire souls building the ecosystems that allow other people to build the companies. So yeah, just trying to be helpful in a bunch of different ways.
That is incredible.
It's fun.
Because you've built this and now you're supporting everyone around you to also be able to build theirs as well and get them as much support as I suppose you didn't have when you started building Clue. So that's really, really impressive.
Yeah, I would love the world to start understanding women's health as societal infrastructure. This is the energy that our energy runs through. Like we have power grid for electricity and gas. Well, society is very much fueled by women's energy, but our infrastructure, our healthcare systems, and our bodies are not being maintained so well. So I'd love the world to start having this understanding that we need to invest into women's health, because it is fundamental and essential infrastructure for our societies. That reminds me, actually, if I can just add one more thing to the thing, because my basic assumption is that if you invest into women's health, you will drive the economy and you will create a healthier planet. There really is a connection between these things. And I would love if the world fully embraced that as a fact and started investing accordingly. So in all this simplicity, it's really trying to promote that idea that if you invest into women's health, you drive the economy and you create a healthier planet in its broad sense.
Yeah, I agree. It's all connected, really.
It is. It really is.
I do haven't back to, I know we pivoted out of your work at Clue, but then I have this question I've always wanted to ask you. I understand that Clue is very ethical and emphasizes a lot on data privacy. How did you navigate all of that? Because I think there's competitors in this space who are getting sued for sharing data with, say, Meta or Google. Was it difficult for you?
No, it was not difficult, because for me, it was such a given that Clue cannot exist without users trusting us with their most intimate health data. And how can you have people trust you if you don't honor their trust? It's duh. And So for me, it was always the sense of it's the right thing to do as a human, but it also seemed like the right thing to do as a business. This was maybe not as clear back then, because back then there was a little bit this sense that the world could go two ways. It could go the way where people say, oh, everybody has all my data anyway, nothing is private anymore. No, data is something that we can keep private and people have privacy rights around data. And this was before the European data protection regulation came into place. We felt, no, it must be private. This is people's private data, and we really have a big responsibility on how we govern this data. So when this regulation came into place, we were pretty much in full compliance already. This is how we had built the company. And this is probably also maybe then the investors we attracted who agreed with this mindset. But of course, it's hard to see when the competition gets rewarded for being bad actors. I mean, they got a lot of growth. I'm talking about Flow, right? They did this thing that drove a lot of growth because their digital advertisement was so effective because they shared too much data back to that networks. This is what they're going on trial for. And it's disappointing to see that they did illegal things. I mean, actual criminal things. And the investment community still thought that they were, the winning, because they wanted to be winners in this space and invested so much money into. But I think over time, I think users will want to choose the companies that really honor their data privacy. But it's a big educational task because, of course, most people don't understand what is happening with their data. Either way, I still firmly believe it's the right approach to have to data. And that's not a negotiable for Clue, and still isn't.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. And to be respectful of your time, I'm going to ask 2 more questions. So this question is about the funding landscape for women's health, or FemTech in general. Like, compared to when you started and where we are at right now, has there been a lot of improvements in terms of funding, in terms of how, like you mentioned, you had to create a whole guide for allies who want to invest in this space? Like, has there been a lot of improvement here, or there's still a lot more to be done?
I think there has been a lot of improvement. There's much more awareness and, amongst investors, this is an interesting field to invest into. And there are now funds that are focused on FemTech, which definitely wasn't the case before. And not only funds, there are also podcasts and events, books, reports, political task forces, like all kind of things. So I think that's a huge improvement. When you look at how much money is being invested into, I don't know, car sharing, AI, brain capture, all kind of other cool things, women's health is still really, really underfunded, So there is still great room for improvement.
That makes sense. Yeah, fingers crossed. And the final question. So let's say the person listening to this podcast, maybe they were listening to it while they were cooking, or they're listening to it while like doing laundry or something, and to walk away with like one thing from you that they should hold on to for a very, very, very long time, and they should remember, what would that be?
Well, if they have entrepreneurial sort of blood in them, I would say if you think you have seen a need in the market, or you have felt a need in your own life that you don't feel is being kind of met in a good way, really trust that what you see is true. Because you will be met with people sitting across the table when you try to raise money or whatever, that maybe have a different biology. They've never met this on their own bodies, or culturally they can't see it. So trusting that what you see is real, I think that's really important.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing that. That gave me a lot to think about, actually.
I'm curious to hear what you think.
So, like, building this, it's been building Asala as a whole, it's been very interesting because the idea behind the project, it started out as something I was doing for fun. I even called it something else. It fun project because I understood that my cycle affected the way I worked. And at the time, I didn't even know this until I like started scrolling on social media, and then I started learning from other women who shared these things. And I then understood that actually that's it was actually what they were saying was basically true. Being able to explain it to say like my brother, for example, or even my boyfriend, it's been very interesting, like trying to like let them know like, hey, for this period of time I'll have like high energy, and then for this period of time I may be a bit grumpy and tired all the time. Building the app around this as well, I also use I've tried Clue and Flow. So I don't even know where I'm headed with this, but like I think accepting the whole thing and then being able to communicate it to other people has been an interesting experience, especially when they're not the same gender as you.
Yeah. But I mean, credit to you for trying. I think that's not just trying, but like keep doing it. I think that's really important. I did a series on LinkedIn
Mhm.
called Dear Men, trying to explain what it feels like to have a woman's body.
Yeah.
And just like, what does it feel like to get your period for the first time, have sex for the first time? What does it feel like to have breasts? What does it feel like to have sex after you've been birthed? Like just these everyday experiences that every single woman have. And of course, we have many different experiences.
Yeah.
It's not just, mine or some sort of general experiences, but I got a lot of very positive feedback because I think a lot of men, they really want to understand and know, but how will they
Yeah.
know if nobody's telling them? So I
Exactly.
think it's really great that you are telling your brother and your boyfriend. I think I encourage women to, within what's possible in their social context. I understand again that people have
Yeah.
different capabilities, but if you can, or whatever you can, try and let them know a little bit what your life experiences are like.
I also think it's also important for other women as well, because like from conversations I've had with like other women, the experiences are different across board. And then there's some things I talk about that some women don't even experience, like cramping before
Yeah,
the PMS and all those things. Some women don't have that.
true.
So
Very,
less.
yeah, we have different, and it changes throughout our life. I think that's another thing with our bodies is that you think you have it figured out, and then something changes. Maybe you get pregnant, or maybe you go through menopause, and maybe you have a condition, or so I never quite finished figuring out. I think that's one of the reasons why it's powerful to collect data
Mhm.
so that you can seeing changes and you can keep understanding what is happening.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we could go on and on, but we have to wrap things up.
Yeah, it was a very lovely conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Yeah, my pleasure.
That's it for today's episode of Blush and Bloom. I hope you're walking away with some fresh perspective on what it means to listen to your body, challenge the status quo, and imagine new futures for women's health. A heartfelt thank you again to Ida for joining me. From co-founding Clue to leading bold conversations through FemTech Assembly, Ida continues to push boundaries in ways that are deeply necessary. You can find links to her work, her talks, and more in the episode description. If this conversation resonated with you, go ahead and subscribe, leave a review, and send this episode to a friend who needs it. You can also follow Blush and Bloom on Instagram at asale.tech or visit asale.tech online for show notes and more. Take care of yourself, stay curious, and I'll catch you in the next episode.